Hey everyone, my name is Samantha, and today I am teaming up with the Prezi team to bring you a presentation about remote work and remote communication strategies. So, like I said, my name is Samantha, and my original background and career training was in education. Since working as a teacher, I've made a career shift to becoming a fully remote community advocate on the GitLab team. I think that my experience moving from a very in person, um, location dependent role to this now remote role is interesting and something that a lot of people can relate to, especially if your team has just recently become a remote team. One thing that I did when I was making my transition from in person work to remote work was really learn how to best leverage my communication strategies. As an educator, I was doing a lot of work in person in communities to communicate and build communities. And in my remote work search, I was able to leverage those in person communication skills to apply to a remote format. Now, as a remote employee and somebody who loves remote and really appreciates the time and lifestyle that it allows me to live and the goals it allows me to reach, I'm helping to spread the word about remote and educate employees who are on remote teams how to become better remote employees, and also educate people who would like to become part of remote teams and are looking for those remote opportunities. I think that I have a lot to share from my own experiences, and I'm also learning a lot as I go through this career change and learn more about remote work. So I'm super excited to share and teach you about a couple of remote work strategies that I have found really beneficial for myself and for my team. So, first, let's talk about asynchronous and what asynchronous means. So, an asynchronous team is a team that is not necessarily working during overlapping or at the same times. So, this might mean that your team is working at different hours of the day. In an in person office, you can usually expect that most team members will show up sometime between 8 and 9 in the morning, and that they'll leave sometime between maybe 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and that most people will take their lunch break around the same time, even together maybe. An asynchronous team is different in that people on your team are working based on their time zone, based on their family commitments, based on the times that they choose because they know that those are the most effective. Asynchronous teams don't necessarily have overlapping hours, which can pose its own challenges and its own benefits. So, first, let's talk about the what of asynchronous. So, asynchronous means you can't expect immediate responses on Slack and email. It's communication that's happening over time, not necessarily all at the same time. The why of asynchronous means that it allows for flexibility in both your working hours, in the way that your time zone defines your working hours, but also so that you're able to be there for friends and family and other kinds of commitments. As an asynchronous team, you are able to design your working hours around your teammates so that you are working in times and during the day when you feel the most productive, when you feel the most efficient, and when you are able to give your best effort to your team. So, let me give you an example. Say you are part of a team who usually works in an office, and now you are a fully remote team and everybody is working from home. Ideally, everyone in your team probably still has the same working hours, but let's say that one person on your team also has their kids at home and now they're homeschooling while they're working their full time job. It's a huge challenge. If you require your team to be online during these set working hours as you did in the office, it's going to pose a really huge challenge to that team member who's also trying to homeschool their students while they're working from home. Whereas an asynchronous team would allow your team members to build their day around their work commitments and their family commitments. So if you decided to make your team a remote asynchronous team, this employee could work in the morning when they have the most attention or when they have the most time that's quiet and calm, and take off time during the day so that they're able to be there and support their students while they are homeschooling and learning at home, and then maybe come back later on in the night to finish up any projects they didn't get to in the morning or wrap up any lingering conversation. So this example of an asynchronous team allows your team members to do their work on their own working hours. A different example for a team like GitLab, the team that I'm on, is that our team is distributed all over the globe. And so naturally, people have different working hours. When I'm sleeping, somebody else at GitLab is probably online working really hard. And I'm not going to wake up to work at the same hours that they are. Instead, I'll just get caught up in the morning when I wake up, uh, assuming that they leave any notes for me to review, and then I'll do the same when I'm signing off for the day. So we make our hours work asynchronously so that we can make our work fit our lifestyle and our lifestyle fit our work, instead of having to make exceptions or having to give something up for the other. Asynchronous work is one of my favorite parts about remote work because for me, growing a career where I can respect my lifestyle and respect my career goals is huge. And I find that being on an asynchronous team, I'm able to do both. Okay, let's talk about the next remote work communication strategy, which is adding context. So at GitLab, we use low context communication for clarity. And I'm going to explain what this low context communication looks like and give some examples and tools that support this kind of communication. This low context communication and all of the other strategies that I'm going to talk about fit so well with asynchronous work that they become essential pieces. None of these necessarily work as effectively alone as they do when they all come together. So, low context communication means that you're going into a conversation and you are assuming that the person that you're talking to doesn't know what you're talking about. When you're in an office, you might be able to pick up on tone or verbal or physical cues from your colleagues. But when you are writing mostly text-based communication, some of that is lost. For me, it's really hard not to interpret tone, and I always have to be reminding myself not to look too much into tone in writing and focus more on the resources and the clarity that this person is providing me. So ways that you can provide low context communication is being explicit and avoiding communication. So picking clear, defining language to identify what you're trying to communicate. Sharing direct and elaborate responses, adding more for that person to be able to read and review is better than having them lingering with questions after they read your note or your comment. And finally, including links wherever possible. If there is a relevant documentation page, or if there's a relevant video that this person should read to get better context, then you should always provide those links right in one spot so they can jump back and forth between resources and get the best understanding. Low context is really important with remote teams because without these body language cues or without a similar experience or understanding tone, we can miss a lot of important elements of communication. Some examples of tools that support low context communication in a remote setting. At GitLab, we use Slack and Google Docs. We also use GitLab itself for project management and email for some communications. Independently, I use Asana to manage my own projects and my own life, and I've used Trello in the past. And I also love to use Prezi Video like this because it provides such a clear and creative platform to record and share training information. In practice, what this looks like is the ability to jump in conversations regardless of when you join them. So this goes back to an asynchronous team that's going in and out of communication based on working hours. If you are always providing details and links, you make it open for anybody to jump into that conversation when they're working and when it's best for them. Another piece to consider when you're thinking about this low context communication is making things public. At GitLab, we make everything public by default. And an example I like to give for this is think about like institutional knowledge that might be locked in your email chains between your employees or between your team. It's really hard to find that information when you need it. But if you are practicing public documentation, your team and yourself is able to reference this information quickly and use it to make decisions and guide projects. Okay, let's talk about the next part of remote communication and remote work. And for that, it's documentation. So documentation is a historical preservation of the work and resources that your team is using. When you get into the practice of documenting things, that information is available and ready for you to use and your team to use whenever you need it. So at GitLab, we work with a handbook first mindset, which means as soon as something comes up that is new or that's different or that needs more clarity, we add it to the handbook. So as I'm doing my work as a community advocate and connecting our community with our GitLab experts, I'm also updating our handbook so that it serves as a single source of truth for our team and that we're always able to improve upon our processes and stay in the loop for our whole team. One piece that's really important to think about in documentation is video calls, because remote teams use video calls often, and as you should, they're a great way to connect synchronously with your team. However, it's important to think about how you're documenting these calls so the information that you're having in these verbal conversations isn't getting lost. Ways that you can do that is to record your calls and post them and make them available for team members to watch at a later date. Also consider having a note taker while you are doing these video calls. At GitLab, we just jump in and take notes for each other when we need. If you feel like you need more structure, you could always assign a note taker or a couple of note takers ahead of the call to record questions and assign tasks as you're having synchronous communication. So the last part I want to talk about is relationship development, because working remotely is not an excuse to limit your team building. Remote can be a really powerful tool to creatively build relationships between your teams. So questions that I always hear as a remote employee is people telling me, I could never work from home, or how do you work at home all day? How do you stay productive? Do you ever feel isolated? And avoiding some of these and answering some of these all comes from a prioritizing effort to make team building important. So, as a remote team, it's important to build time into your day that allows your team to connect and communicate about things that are not work related. At GitLab, we use coffee chats and company calls during the day to just connect with our team from around the world and learn, connect over common experiences or common interests. Having this time built into the day helps your team combat isolation and stay connected, whereas you maybe won't pass each other in the hallway and you can't just strike up conversation. Having it built into the day really gives your team the time that they need to connect with each other. So some examples, like I said, at GitLab, we use coffee chats. We also have some creative Slack channels like Random or Dad Jokes are some of my favorite to check in on every day for a quick laugh. We have virtual events. Also, some of our teams have really cool walking meetings where they take Zoom on the go with them and have their conversations or meetings while they're walking around their neighborhood. Okay, so the last piece that I want to talk about is how you can take action on these remote work and communication strategies right now. So if you are a company who is considering going remote, or perhaps you've just become an all-remote company because you must have your employees be staying home, you could always refer to our GitLab communication handbook section and our remote manifesto as a guide for how you can start a remote team. It's also so important that your entire team is embracing an all-remote culture, especially from the leadership down, so that your entire organization is on the same page. If you're an individual who has just become a remote employee or you're looking for remote work, adopting these communication strategies in the work that you do and in the job applications you're submitting will show your future employers the ability and skills you have to communicate efficiently on a remote team. I also highly suggest you start to document your journey by creating LinkedIn articles or a blog so that your employees will see that documentation and record keeping is important to you and something that you're good at. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out these resources. If you want to reach me, you can always reach out via LinkedIn. My name is Samantha Lee. You can find more of my resources on www.career-reroute.com, where I share blogs and resources about remote work. And you can always check out our GitLab handbook to learn more about remote work and how you and your company can build a remote team successfully. Thanks so much.